My name is Olivia Anderson, and I'm 28 years old. 10 years after my parents stood in our kitchen, listened to my sister deliver an ultimatum, her or me, and chose her, a letter landed in my Chicago mailbox saying I owed $340,000 I had never borrowed, on a bank guarantee signed in handwriting that looked exactly like mine. Here's what none of them knew when they signed my name. They picked the one person in the family trained to read every line they ever wrote. What I did next took the better part of a year. It ended in a room on the 11th floor of a law office, and none of us walked out of that room the same. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet people finally tell the stories their families hoped they would keep to themselves. If you have ever been the one they counted out, this one is for you. Drop a comment below, and be sure to subscribe. These days I live in Lincoln Square, on the north side of Chicago, in an apartment small enough to clean in an hour and quiet enough to hear the radiator think. I run at 5:30. I make one good cup of coffee. Then I go to work, and find money that people swear does not exist. I'm a forensic accountant. I audit liars for a living. I just never expected to open a file on my own family. The letter came on a Tuesday, in a plain envelope from First Meridian Community Bank of Marion Falls, Ohio. Notice of default. Demand upon guarantor. It said I had personally guaranteed business loans for Anderson Comfort Heating and Air. It said the loans were in default. It said the bank expected payment of $340,000, and it gave me 30 days to respond. Attached was a copy of the guarantee. Signature of guarantor, Olivia R. Anderson. I stood at my kitchen counter and stared at that signature for a long time. The slant was right. The heavy little loop on the O was right. It was my handwriting the way a wax figure is a person, accurate enough to fool anyone who never loved the real thing. I took out a pen and signed my own name on the back of the envelope, just to be sure I still knew how. 2 signatures, side by side. One of them was a lie, and I was the only person alive who could say which one. I had not spoken to my parents in 10 years. I had not seen my sister since the night she pulled the pin on our family. So let me take you back there. June of 2016, a yellow kitchen in Marion Falls. Because that is where every line of this letter was really written. Marion Falls is the kind of Ohio town where the hardware store knows your grandfather's middle name, and the church bulletin is the local newspaper. My father, Frank Anderson, ran Anderson Comfort Heating and Air for 30 years. His name was on a banner at the church softball field, on the back of Little League jerseys, on half the furnace stickers in the county. In a town like that, a family is not just people. A family is a storefront, and everyone can see your display window. My sister Madison was the display window. 4 years older than me, homecoming queen, pageant sash in the closet, a laugh that made cashiers give her free things. Her photos climbed the staircase wall in matching frames, one for every triumph. I was the other one, the sturdy one. Straight A report cards that got a nod at dinner and never made it to the wall. My mother, Susan, kept the company books at the kitchen table and kept the family story everywhere else, and in her accounting there was never any question about where the family's attention should be invested. I don't say that with self-pity. I say it the way I'd describe any system I've audited. Money flows where the owners believe the return is, and so does everything else. Madison got the car, the boutique dream, the benefit of every doubt. I got told I was lucky to be so capable. For a long time I mistook that for a compliment. There was one person in Marion Falls whose accounting worked differently, and that was my grandmother Ruth. When she died, 2 years before that yellow kitchen night, she left each of her granddaughters one thing. What she left me is the reason I got thrown away. My grandmother Ruth lived 4 blocks over, in a house that smelled like cinnamon and furnace oil, and her kitchen was the only room in the world where I never felt like an expense. She kept her recipes in a little cedar box with a brass hinge, and she'd let me copy them out while she quizzed me on my multiplication tables. She was the one who noticed I liked numbers. She was the one who said it like a gift and never like a consolation prize. I complained once, maybe at 11, that Madison got everything because Madison always won everything. Grandma Ruth put down her rolling pin and looked at me over her glasses. "You don't earn a seat at my table, child," she said. "You just sit." I didn't understand that sentence for another 17 years. What she left me was money for school. $38,000, set aside in a custodial account for my education, with my mother named as custodian until I came of age. What she left both of us girls was the lake cottage out on Miller Pond, the one with the crooked dock. For the girls someday. That's how the paper read. $38,000 is not a fortune. But if you were me at 17, it was a door standing wide open. I had the brochures for Ohio State. I had the accounting program circled in blue pen. I had a spreadsheet, because of course I did, with tuition in one column and the fund in the next, and the two columns met. I used to fall asleep doing that math. That June, 3 weeks after my high school graduation, the financial aid office asked me for a current statement from the account. So on a Thursday morning, I rode my bike to the bank. The teller knew me. Everyone knew everyone, and she pulled up the account with a smile that fell off her face one line at a time. Balance, $61.12. I asked her to check again. She turned the screen toward me instead, which is what people do when they'd rather the numbers deliver the bad news. The fund hadn't vanished in one dramatic sweep. It had been bled, withdrawal by withdrawal, across 14 months. 2,000 here, 3,500 there. Each slip signed by the custodian of record, in handwriting I'd known my whole life, the same hand that signed my permission slips and my birthday cards. My mother. I stood there doing the one thing I knew how to do. I added it up. The total came within shouting distance of $38,000, and the last withdrawal was 11 days old. And here's the detail that made the room tilt. That same spring, my sister's boutique downtown, Maison M, had thrown itself a grand reopening. New sign, new racks, a ribbon and a cake, and a write-up in the church bulletin. My parents had beamed through all of it. Nobody had said a word about how a store that never sold anything kept being reborn. I asked the teller to print the transaction history. She did, and she slid it across the counter the way you'd hand someone a biopsy result. I folded it into my backpack, rode home past the Anderson comfort banner at the ball field, and set the table for dinner like a girl who still lived in the family I'd woken up in. That was the last calm hour of my old life. We were 4 plates into a quiet dinner when I put the folded statement next to the mashed potatoes and smoothed it flat. I kept my voice level, which people mistake for calm, and asked my mother why Grandma Ruth's school fund had $61 in it. My mother's fork stopped in the air. My father looked at the paper the way he looked at a furnace he already knew was cracked. And Madison didn't even flinch. She dabbed her mouth with her napkin and said, "Live, honey. Don't be dramatic. Grandma's money is family money." "Family money," I repeated. She said the boutique was an investment in all of us. She said when Maison M took off, it would put the Anderson name on the map. And I could go to school anytime. Community colleges exist. I was always the practical one. I'd land on my feet. I looked at my parents and waited for one of them to say the obvious thing. Nobody said the obvious thing. My mother studied her napkin like it held instructions. My father said we'd discuss it as a family later, which was the closest he ever came to a verdict against Madison. And then I made my mistake. I said the word, stealing. The temperature in that kitchen dropped 10 degrees. Madison stood up slowly, the way she used to stand up on pageant stages, pushed her chair in like punctuation, and looked straight at our parents. "Mom and Dad, you choose," she said. "Either she leaves this house, or I do." Nobody laughed. That's the part I need you to understand. Nobody laughed. The clock over the stove ticked. My mother reached over, still not looking at me, and took hold of my father's sleeve. My father cleared his throat. And I already knew. He didn't say Madison's name. He said, "Olivia, maybe it's best you get a head start on being independent. You've always been good at that." 18 years old, 3 weeks past a graduation cap, and my father turned my report cards into an eviction notice in a single sentence. There was no screaming after that. Screaming would have meant a fight, and a fight would have meant a chance. My mother brought me 2 trash bags. The good kind, she pointed out, the thick ones, and stood in my doorway while I packed, narrating items I should leave for the house. At the door, she pressed two $20 bills into my hand, then took one of them back. "For gas," she said, "in case Carol can't keep you long." On the porch, with the June bugs throwing themselves at the light, I asked my father the only question I had left. "Why her? Every time?" He looked at me. And I'll give him this, he didn't look away. And he said, "We put everything where the return was." Then the storm door clicked shut, and the porch light went off while I was still standing under it, which told me my mother was at the switch. From the upstairs window, my sister watched me drag my life to the curb in 2 trash bags. When I looked up, she pulled the curtain. Not slammed. Pulled, gently, the way you close a display case. I walked 1.5 miles to my Aunt Carol's house and slept that night on her plaid couch, under a crocheted blanket that smelled like cigarettes and kindness. I was out, empty-handed, like the fund. And in the 10 years that followed, not one of them ever came looking for me. Though it would turn out, they'd never actually let me go. Here is what I did with my decade, since nobody from Marion Falls ever asked. 2 months on Carol's couch, then a room above a laundromat that shook when the dryers hit spin cycle. I washed dishes, then waited tables at a diner off the interstate where the truckers tipped better than the churchgoers. I enrolled at the community college and took my classes at night. Accounting, naturally, because numbers had already proven they were the only things in my life that wouldn't lie to me. I transferred on scholarship. I finished my degree with a GPA I told no one about, out of old habit. I sat for the last section of the CPA exam in Chicago on May 12, 2021. And I remember the date the way other women remember weddings, because you remember the days you build yourself out of. After that came the fraud examiner certification, then a junior seat at a Chicago consulting firm under a partner named Daniel Webb, who read my resume, looked up, and said, "So who taught you to work like this?" "Nobody," I said, which was the truest job interview answer ever given. And through all of it, I kept a habit I'm not proud of. Every diploma, every license, every promotion. Some part of me was still mailing it to Marion Falls in my head, still making deposits into an account I hoped my family was secretly keeping. A Christmas card arrived from my mother in 2019, addressed in that familiar hand, 4 lines about the weather. I read it 11 times and did not answer it, and I counted that restraint as healing. For 10 years I honestly believed they had simply written me off, a closed account, a bad debt, forgotten. The letter on my kitchen counter said something worse. They had been using my name the whole time. I did what I do at work when a client swears there's been a mistake. I verified. I called First Meridian the next morning, gave the reference number, and asked the servicing officer to walk me through everything with my name on it. There wasn't one loan. There were 3. All originated in 2021, all for Anderson Comfort Heating and Air, stacked one on top of another like sandbags against a flood. And the biggest one carried a federal small business backing, which meant paperwork, which meant sworn statements, which meant this was so much bigger than an awkward family phone call. Combined balance in default, $340,000. My name sat on the personal guarantee for all of it. I asked the obvious question. How does a woman in Chicago guarantee loans in Ohio without ever once being contacted? The officer read me the file. Every notice had gone to the address of record. Route 9, Marion Falls. My parents' house. For 5 years, the bank had been faithfully mailing my obligations to the people who created them, and the first time anyone went looking for the actual Olivia Anderson was after the default, when a skip tracer found my Chicago address in about a day. A personal guarantee doesn't show up on your credit report like a car payment, by the way. It's a shadow debt. It only steps into the light when everything is already on fire. Then the officer said something that stopped my pen. Your co-guarantors are also in default, she said. Co-guarantors, plural. I asked her to read the names. Frank Anderson, Susan Anderson, Madison Anderson, the whole family, holding hands on the same sinking paper, and one signature among them belonging to a ghost they'd invented, wearing my name. I hired a lawyer that Friday. Rachel Donovan, recommended by a colleague, a woman who kept a candy dish full of paper clips and treated outrage as a billable inefficiency. She laid out the victim's roadmap like a recipe. Police report, identity theft affidavit for the Federal Trade Commission, a sworn statement to the bank disputing the signatures. Straightforward, she said. And then she looked at me the way good lawyers look at you before the hard part. Olivia, these forms ask who had access, motive, opportunity. To do this right, you will name names. Under oath. On paper. I'm very good at paper. I knew what my name looked like next to the word affiant, and I knew what my mother's name would look like next to the words person responsible. I asked Rachel for a little time. She said the bank's clock gave me less of it than I'd like, and I went home and set those blank forms on my kitchen table where the demand letter had been, and for 3 days they sat there like a verdict waiting for a judge to show up. People ask why I didn't just fill everything out and mail it back that same night. If you've never had a family like mine, you won't understand the pause. If you have, you're probably nodding right now. Tell me in the comments what you would have done, because I genuinely want to know. And stay with me. What I found inside those loan files was worse than the letter. While the forms sat on my table, I did the other thing I'm trained to do. I pulled every public record with the Anderson name on it, the same way I would for any engagement, except this time, every document had a memory attached. The picture assembled itself fast, and it was ugly. Supplier liens against Anderson Comfort going back 4 years. A judgment from a parts distributor in Columbus. My parents' house on Route 9 refinanced twice in 6 years, the second time nearly to the studs. And Maison M, my sister's boutique, wasn't one business. It was 3. 3 separate companies, each born, drowned, and quietly renamed, like a swimmer going under and coming up with a new haircut. Every collapse of Madison's dream had been patched with money from my father's company, and when the company ran dry, the company borrowed, and when the borrowing needed more names, well, I already knew whose name they'd found. Then I lined up the dates, because dates are where liars get lazy. The largest loan, the federally backed one, the one that turned this from a family sin into a federal case, was funded in the 3rd week of May 2021. I cross-checked the church bulletin archive, which Marion Falls keeps online out of civic pride. That same week, Maison M celebrated its 3rd grand reopening. Ribbon. Cake. My mother beaming in a floral dress, my father's arm around Madison in front of a brand new awning. The caption called them the hardest working family in Marion Falls. I sat with that photograph a long time. My tuition had bought the first awning. Apparently, my signature had bought the 3rd. The phone rang while the photo was still on my screen. The caller ID said Mom. 10 years, and I'd never changed her contact entry. That's a confession, I suppose. I let it ring 3 times before I answered, and my mother's voice came through exactly as I remembered it. Warm, unhurried, absolutely certain of its welcome. Sweetheart, she said. As if the porch light had never gone off. She was sorry to call out of the blue. She heard I was doing so well in Chicago. There had been a misunderstanding at the bank, some confusion with old paperwork. Nothing serious. But the bank was being difficult. And here her voice did the thing it does, going soft and reasonable like a hand smoothing a bedsheet. Family helps family, Livy. All they needed was for me to sign a little paper clearing this up. A little paper. I looked at the demand letter on my table, $340,000 of little paper. I kept my voice pleasant, and I asked one question. Who signed my name, Mom? The line went quiet for exactly as long as a person needs to choose a lie. Then she said my father's knees were getting worse. That he wasn't sleeping. That stress was dangerous for a man his age. And had I really become someone who'd let strangers at a bank tear her family apart over a formality? You choose, said a voice in my memory, standing up from a dinner table. I told her I had to go, and she said, "Call your sister." And I hung up and stood in my quiet kitchen with my heart going like a fist on a door. The next morning, Daniel Webb stuck his head into my office and asked me to come sit in on a new matter meeting. "There's a fraud exam coming in," he said. "Out of Ohio." I knew before he finished the sentence, the way you know a pothole is coming on a road you've driven your whole life. Outside counsel for First Meridian Community Bank wanted our firm for a fraud examination on a defaulted commercial borrower, Anderson Comfort Heating and Air, Marion Falls, Ohio. Suspected irregularities in the guarantee documents. I let Daniel get all the way through the intake summary, and then I told him, in front of the engagement partner, that the borrower was my father, that one of the disputed signatures was almost certainly mine, and that I was recusing myself effective immediately. The room got very quiet, very fast. To his credit, Daniel didn't ask a single gossiping question. He moved me off the matter, walled me off from the files, and had it documented before lunch. Because in my profession, the wall is what keeps your license, and my license was the only inheritance I'd ever gotten to keep. But here's what recusal doesn't do. It doesn't make you deaf. As I stood to leave the conference room, Daniel tapped the folder square on the table and said, without looking up, "Between us, Olivia, banks don't hire people like us for bookkeeping errors." I nodded and walked back to my office and sat very still. My family thought they were negotiating an awkward misunderstanding with a small-town loan officer. In reality, a bank had smelled forgery, lawyered up, and started paying specialist rates for proof. The machine that finds people like my mother. I helped build machines like that. I knew its gears. I knew its speed. And I knew that everything now depended on documents I hadn't seen. So I did the one thing left to me. As the person being dunned, I demanded my own copies. The loan files arrived through Rachel 2 weeks later, 3 fat folders of them, and I did what I've done 100 times for strangers. Spread the pages across my kitchen table at 9 at night, coffee going cold, and read a family's finances like an autopsy report. Except this autopsy had my baby pictures in it. I worked through the small loans first, flagging, sticking tabs. Then I reached the big one, the federally backed one, and turned to the signature page, and the whole apartment went silent in that way rooms do when something changes in them. Signature of guarantor, Olivia R. Anderson. Executed and acknowledged before a notary public in Marion Falls, Ohio. Personally appeared before me, the stamp said. Dated May 12, 2021. I sat back in my chair. May 12, 2021. I didn't need my calendar, but I opened it anyway, because verification is a love language when you've been lied to enough. There it was, in my own 5-year-old handwriting. CPA exam, final section, 8 a.m., downtown Chicago Testing Center. 300 miles from Marion Falls. A check-in photograph, a palm scan, a seat number, a completion printout with a timestamp, buried in the folder where I keep the documents that prove I exist. On the single most documented morning of my entire life, the morning I finished becoming the woman they'd bet against, someone stood in front of a notary in Ohio, held a pen the way I hold a pen, and swore to be me. I printed the exam confirmation, laid it beside the signature page, and clipped them together, and something in my chest went cold and precise, like a lock finding its key. Whoever did this hadn't just borrowed my name. They had borrowed the one day of my life where I could prove, to the minute, exactly where I was. Then I turned to the collateral schedule, read the property list, and stopped breathing for a second. Lakefront parcel. Miller Pond. Grandma Ruth's cottage was in these files too. I drove to Ohio on a Friday, 5 hours of interstate with my questions lined up like mile markers, and checked into a motel out by the highway exit because I wasn't going to sleep under that roof, and we all knew it. The house on Route 9 looked smaller than my memory of it, the way all haunted houses do in daylight. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She'd been watching the window, and for one disorienting second she hugged me, and she smelled like the same lotion, and my body betrayed me by remembering it. Inside, they'd staged it like a holiday. Coffee cake on the good plate. Grandma Ruth's chair still in its corner, like a witness. My parents performed 20 minutes of small talk about my career with the wide-eyed pride of people describing a stranger's daughter, and then my father set down his fork and got to it. This bank business, he said, was a mess of formalities. Signatures, honey. That's just how family companies run. Your mother's handled everyone's paperwork for 30 years. I've signed for my brother. It's what you do. The bank just needs you to confirm it's fine, my mother said, sliding the words in smooth as a butter knife. Confirm it's fine? I asked. Fine like Grandma's school fund was fine. And watched my father's jaw set while my mother refilled coffee nobody wanted. Neither of them said Madison's name. They didn't have to. On the refrigerator, pinned under a magnet shaped like a lighthouse, was a glossy card. Mason M. Grand reopening. New location. New logo. Number 4, if anyone was counting, and I am always counting. 10 years, $340,000, one federal investigation, and the machine that ate my future was still open for business. Before I left, my father waved me out to the garage, which is where the men of Marion Falls hold their sacraments. He was wiping down a socket set that was already clean, the way he did when a customer owed him money he wasn't going to see. For a while he talked about the business, thin margins, big box competitors, 2 warm winters in a row, boys who don't want to learn a trade. It had the shape of an apology and none of the ingredients. Then he said the thing he'd probably rehearsed. A family is like a company, Olivia. You've got limited fuel and one engine that has to carry everybody, and you feed the engine first. That's not favorites. That's management. Back in 2016, he said, you could already stand on your own. Your sister couldn't. And then, softer, almost proud of the arithmetic, he said it again. The sentence that had been ringing in my skull for a decade. We put everything where the return was. I looked at this man. 63 years old, arthritis in both knees, a company bleeding out behind him and a daughter he'd mailed into debt without blinking. And I understood something that made it worse. Not better. He wasn't lying. He believed this was love. Run efficiently. In his ledger, exiling me was a sound decision that had, look at her now, even paid off. I asked him quietly whether the engine had ever once carried me. He frowned, genuinely puzzled, and said, your mother handled the paperwork side. Right there, filed under paperwork, was my whole life in that family. I said goodnight, drove back to the motel and sat in the parking lot for a while, watching the vacancy sign blink. One conversation left. The next morning I went to see the engine herself. Maison M, 4th incarnation, occupied the end unit of a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparer, which, as commercial metaphors go, was almost too on the nose. Inside, it was beautiful the way a showroom is beautiful. Perfect lighting, thin inventory, no customers. Madison came around the counter with both arms out, cried Livy like we'd parted at a slumber party, and hugged me before I could arrange my body into an answer. She gave me the tour. She used phrases like curated retail experience and brand ecosystem. 10 years had polished her patter and hollowed her eyes, and up close, my dazzling sister looked like a woman running downhill in front of an avalanche and calling it a fitness plan. Then she poured us tea and got to it, and I'll say this for Madison. She didn't bother pretending the signatures were real. That's the difference between her and our parents. She skipped the formalities and misunderstanding script entirely. Liv, be honest, she said. You're doing well. You've got no husband, no kids, no family depending on you. For us, this is survival. For you, it's a Tuesday. Sign the paper and everybody gets to keep their lives. I asked her if she'd ever thought about what Grandma's money was supposed to be. She stirred her tea and said, and I quote, that money kept this family's name alive when the store needed it. And look at you. You made something of yourself anyway. See? It worked out for everyone. She said it gently, kindly even. Like a fund manager explaining a reallocation to a client too small to matter. I drove back to the motel with my hands very steady on the wheel and found an envelope wedged in my room door. There is exactly one motel in Marion Falls and everyone knows it. My name on it, in Madison's handwriting. The note said one line, Pancake House on Route 12, tomorrow, 7 a.m., just us. So at 7 in the morning, I sat across from my sister in a vinyl booth out past the county line, and for the first time in my life, I saw Madison without the display lighting. No makeup. Hair in a clip. Hands around her coffee like it was the last warm thing in Ohio. She talked for a while, quietly, and none of it was patter. "Do you know what it's like?" she said. "To be the whole plan? You were allowed to be smart. I was required to be magic. Every dollar they ever moved toward me, they read out loud at dinner like a stock report. I was the investment, Liv. I was never allowed to fail. I woke up at 22 already behind schedule. For one long minute, in a booth that smelled like syrup and burnt coffee, I looked at the person Marion Falls built and felt the ground I'd stood on for 10 years tilt a few degrees. She wasn't the machine. She was its first product, and its most expensive one, and some part of her knew it. You could see the knowing move behind her eyes like a fish under ice. I almost reached across the table. Then she set down the coffee cup, and the saleswoman came back up through her spine like a tide coming in. "That's why it has to be you," she said. "The affidavit, the bank, all of it. Let it be a mix-up. Sign the ratification. You're the only one strong enough to carry this. You always were." There it was. Even her confession had a payment plan attached. I put $5 on the table for my untouched coffee, and I told my sister I'd see her soon. I meant it more than she knew. The official version of the offer was waiting in my mailbox in Chicago a week later, on the letterhead of a firm out of Columbus, and it was a masterpiece of the genre. Enclosed, a draft ratification and consent, whereby I would affirm that in 2021 I had authorized the execution of the guarantees on my behalf. Family formality, notarized and laundered into law. And then, in the cover letter, the sweetener, phrased with a lawyer's plausible tenderness. My parents deeply regretted the estrangement. They hoped this resolution would open a path to reconciliation. I was warmly invited to join the family for Thanksgiving, and my parents intended to update their estate plans to reflect my place in the family. My place in the family. 10 years of Christmases alone will teach you exactly what a sentence like that weighs. I want to be honest with you, because this is the part nobody admits out loud. I printed that ratification, set it on my kitchen table, and put a pen on top of it. I sat there most of an hour. The pen didn't move, but I won't pretend my hand never wanted it to. Home is home, even when home has your forged name in its filing cabinet, even when the invitation arrives stapled to a felony. If you've ever held a door in one hand and your self-respect in the other, tell me in the comments which one you set down first. I read every single one. What I finally did with that pen is coming, I promise. But first I had to lose the last two things still tying me to the old version of hope. That week took both of them. The first thing that week took was my illusion of neutral ground. My friend Jenna came over with takeout, read the lawyer's letter standing up, and delivered the verdict in one flat line. "Liv, they didn't invite you home. They priced you in." I laughed. And then I stopped laughing, because that's exactly what the letter was. Thanksgiving as a contract term. Daughterhood. Contingent on execution of enclosed documents. Then came the phone call from my Aunt Carol, the woman who'd given me a couch when my parents gave me trash bags, and her voice was small in a way I'd never heard. "Honey, people are talking," she said. The version going around the church and the salon and the feed store was tidy. Frank and Susan's ungrateful girl got rich in Chicago and came back to kick her family while they're down. Nobody in that version stole anything. Nobody forged anything. Marion Falls needed the Andersons to stay the hardest working family in town, and the story bent itself around the need like water around a stone. Carol believed me. She'd seen the trash bags, but when I asked if she'd say so out loud, the line went quiet, and she finally said, "I live here, honey." I told her I understood, and the terrible part is, I did. The second call came an hour later from Rachel. The bank's fraud unit had formally taken over the file. An investigator named Tom Rice wanted to interview me, on the record, with counsel present. The music had stopped. There were 2 chairs left, the affianced chair and the accomplice's chair, and everyone I shared blood with was praying I'd sit down in the second one. Rachel cleared her conference table and laid it out for me the way I lay out findings for a client, which I appreciated, because mercy dressed as clarity is still mercy. Door 1. Sign the ratification. The moment I affirmed those signatures, the fraud case would soften into a family squabble. The bank would probably settle. My parents would keep the house. Madison would keep the store. And I would have made a false statement about a federally backed loan to a federally insured bank in writing. If it ever surfaced, and Rachel tapped the copy of the May 12th signature page, already sitting in the fraud unit's file, next to a time-stamped exam record with my palm print on it, I wouldn't just be exposed, I'd be prosecutable. My CPA license, my fraud examiner certification, my career, the entire self I had built out of a plaid couch and night classes, gone, converted into one last capital infusion for Maison M. Door 2. Tell the truth under oath, and put my mother's name in a federal file. There is no third door, Olivia, Rachel said. There never was. I looked at my hands and heard myself say something I hadn't planned to say out loud. I've been looking for the third door for 10 years. That's what the unanswered Christmas card was. That's what the trophies mailed to Marion Falls in my head were. The third door is the one where they love you back without you having to lie. Rachel, who bills in 6-minute increments and does not hug, slid the paper clip dish across the table like a communion plate and said, "Then let's find out what the truth costs." First, she said, we finished the forensics. There was one signature left to trace, and one piece of Grandma Ruth still unaccounted for. It took a subpoena and the better part of a summer, but the notary's journal finally came in, and the county's copy of the deed records came with it. And on a gray Thursday, I finally read the whole machine, gear by gear. The notary was Gary Pruitt, my father's poker buddy, the man who'd notarized half of Marion Falls from a desk at the insurance agency. His journal swore that Olivia R. Anderson personally appeared before him on May 12, 2021. His journal was a work of fiction, but journals tell you who was willing, not who held the pen, so Rachel's document examiner did the old, patient work. Comparison exemplars, pressure patterns, the little tremor where a forger slows down to be careful on the capital A. Then she laid the guarantee beside the 14-month bleed of withdrawal slips from a custodial account in 2015 and 2016, and the conclusion wrote itself. The hand that signed me onto $340,000 of debt was the hand that had emptied my college fund, the hand that signed my permission slips, the hand that wrote 4 lines about the weather in 2019. My mother. Paperwork side indeed, and the deed records held the last gear. In 2019, a quitclaim deed had moved my half-interest in the Miller Pond cottage, Grandma Ruth's for the girls, someday, over to my parents, so the cottage could be pledged as collateral. The signature surrendering my share was mine, notarized by Gary Pruitt, dated a Tuesday in October when I was a scholarship senior 300 miles away, sitting in an evening auditing class. They hadn't only taken the future Ruth left me, they'd gone back for the someday. My mother didn't just choose my sister that night on the porch. She had been signing me away, one page at a time, for years. 2 days before my interview with the fraud unit, Madison texted me for the first time in 10 years. "Dad's in the hospital. Chest pains. They're keeping him overnight. Come. I'd love to tell you I saw the timing for what it was and stayed home." I got in the car. 5 hours later, I was standing in a cardiac ward hallway in Ohio, watching monitors blink through an open door, close enough to hear my parents talking when they thought they were alone. The doctors had said observation, a stress test in the morning, no blockage found yet. Frightening, survivable, ordinary. My father's voice was tired, but it wasn't weak, and what it was saying stopped me with my hand already raised to knock. "She owes us, Sue. We raised her. Roof, food, 18 years. One signature. She owes this family that much." My mother murmured something soothing I couldn't make out, and my father said it again, slower, like a man totaling an invoice. "She owes us." I stood in that hallway in my coat, holding a box of bakery cookies, and I finally heard it plain. On a heart monitor, at 70 nothing beats a minute, I was still a receivable. I left the cookies at the nurse's station with his room number on a sticky note, and I drove back to Chicago through the dark. Somewhere around Gary, Indiana, I stopped hoping. It felt like taking off wet clothes. Monday morning, in Rachel's conference room, I signed my name to the truth, and I want to tell you exactly what that looked like. Because it is the least cinematic thing in the world, and it changed everything. A police report, a federal identity theft affidavit, a sworn declaration for the bank, and on each one, a box that asked who did this, where I typed. In order, the 3 names I'd been protecting with my silence. Susan Anderson, Frank Anderson, Madison Anderson. Every name felt like a door clicking shut somewhere down a long hallway. Stapled behind the declaration went the exhibits. The May 12th signature page, the exam center's time-stamped confirmation, Gary Pruitt's fictional journal entry, the quitclaim from a Tuesday I could account for in 6-minute billing increments. Then Tom Rice came in with a legal pad and 3 hours of careful questions, and I gave him careful answers. Exact, complete, and without one drop of extra vinegar, because I've watched bitterness ruin more good witnesses than perjury. When it was over, Rachel walked me to the elevator and said the thing she was ethically required to say. Olivia, once this goes into the system, you cannot unname them. Recanting a sworn statement is its own crime. I understand it's your family. I pressed the button and heard myself answer in a voice that sounded, for the first time, like Grandma Ruth's. I know what a signature means. I'm the only one in my family who does. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived inviting all parties to a mediation session in Columbus. The bank, its counsel, its investigator, my parents, my sister, and me. Everyone in one room, 10 years late. The mediation was set for a law office on the 11th floor of a glass building in Columbus, in a room with a table long enough to seat a jury and a view of the river that no one looked at. Someone had put out water pitchers and, on a side table, a box of tissues, which told me the room had seen this kind of file before. The bank's side arrived first. 2 lawyers with matching briefcases and Tom Rice, who nodded at me like a colleague, which in a strange way, we now were. Rachel sat on my right and arranged her folders in the order a surgeon arranges instruments. Then the door opened and my family came in, and 10 years of imagination had not prepared me for the actual arithmetic of time. My father moved like his knees were negotiating each step. My mother had gone gray at the temples and small in the shoulders, and her eyes found me instantly, the way they used to find me across a church picnic when I'd wandered. Madison wore the full armor, blowout, blazer, the smile. But the smile was load-bearing now. Their lawyer settled them at the far end like a man herding weather. The mediator, a retired judge with a voice like a porch swing, laid out the geography. The bank was open to discussing a civil resolution of the defaulted loans. However, the criminal referral concerning the disputed signatures rested with federal prosecutors, and its weight would depend considerably on the sworn testimony of Ms. Olivia Anderson. Every head at that table turned to me at the same time, and then the family's lawyer unclasped his briefcase, took out a document I recognized, and slid the ratification down the long table, one more time, like a last card being played. Before the lawyer could speak to it, my mother put her hand on his arm, and she stood, and Susan Anderson did the one thing in this world I had no armor against. She said the words. "We were wrong," she said, and her voice broke in the middle of wrong. "About the fund, about that night. About all of it, sweetheart, we were wrong, and we have missed you every single day for 10 years. Your room is still your room. Come home, Olivia." My father didn't speak. My father is a man who lets invoices talk. But he nodded, slowly, looking at me with wet eyes. And that nod was the loudest thing I'd ever heard from him. And Madison, my dazzling, undefeated sister, who once stood up at a dinner table and priced me out of my own family, said just one thing, in the smallest voice she has ever used in her life. "Please." The room held still. The river went on below the window. Somebody's pen ticked against a legal pad and stopped, embarrassed. And here is my confession, with the tissues in reach and my family's faces doing things I had waited a decade to see. Some 18-year-old girl inside me, standing on a porch with 2 trash bags, whispered, "This is it. This is the door. All you have to do is sign." They had finally said the words. I had waited 10 years for exactly these words, and the words had a price sheet. The invitation home had arrived in the same folder as the ratification, carried by the same lawyer, contingent on the same signature. I looked down the long table at the paper. Then I pulled it toward me, and I picked up the pen, and I heard my mother exhale in relief. I set the pen down beside the ratification. Beside it, not on it. And instead, I opened my own folder and took out 2 pages and laid them side by side where everyone could see. The guarantee with my name sworn before a notary in Marion Falls on May 12, 2021, and the testing center record placing me in downtown Chicago that same morning, palm print, seat number, time stamp. Then I spoke, and I kept my voice low, because a career spent in rooms like this has taught me that the quietest person holds the gavel. 10 years ago, I said, somebody in this family stood in our kitchen and said, "You choose. Either she leaves this house, or I do. You chose. I've lived inside your choice for 10 years, and I made a life there, and it's a good life. So today, this one is mine. This time, I choose." My mother's hand came up to her mouth. Madison stood so fast her chair skidded on the carpet, saying my name, saying, "Be reasonable." Her voice climbing registers, and my father barked Olivia like I was 16 and out past curfew, and I did not raise my voice at all. I told the mediator my affidavit stands, every word. I told the bank's counsel they would have my full cooperation, and the prosecutors too, whenever they called. And I told the lawyer, whose pen had gone very still over his legal pad, that I would not be signing his document, today or ever. Then I looked at my family, all 3 of them, and gave them the only inheritance speech I will ever make. "I sign my name for a living," I said. "It is the one thing in this family that was never for sale. You taught me everything gets put where the return is. You just never imagined I'd learned it." My mother folded forward over the table, crying the way you cry when the check bounces, and my father stared at me down that long table like he was looking at a stranger, and for the first time in our lives, that was true in both directions. What happened after that was quick and procedural, the way endings actually are. The mediator called a recess nobody came back from. The bank's counsel confirmed on the record that, in light of the examiner's findings, First Meridian would release me from the guarantees and treat my signatures as forged. My name, formally, legally, mine again. Rice packed his legal pad with the satisfied economy of a man whose file had just closed itself. The criminal referral went forward. There was nothing left in that room for the Andersons of Marion Falls but lawyers and consequences, and I gathered my folders and walked to the elevators. And that's where Madison caught me. No blowout could survive that morning. She had cried through the armor. She didn't pitch. There was finally nothing left to sell. She looked at me with our grandmother's cheekbones and our mother's eyes and said, "You've killed us, you know that? You've killed this family." And I want you to hear exactly how I answered, because it took me 10 years and $340,000 to be able to say it in a level voice. "No, Madison, I just stopped paying your bills." The elevator doors closed on her face, and it was the last time I've seen my sister outside a courtroom. Then I rode down 11 floors, walked into the parking garage, sat in my car, and cried for about 10 minutes. Big, ugly, hiccuping crying. The kind you do at a funeral you saw coming for years. Both things were true at once, and I let them be. I had never been more free, and I had never been more orphaned. When I was done, I wiped my face, called Jenna, said one sentence, "It's over, and I'm okay," and drove home to Chicago with the radio on. The legal machinery did what it does. Slowly, without drama, like winter coming. Over the following months, the pieces fell in the order Rachel had predicted. My mother pleaded guilty to making false statements to a federally insured lender. Because she was 60, first time and cooperative, she received 3 years of probation and a restitution order that will follow her like a shadow for the rest of her life. My father took one count tied to the loan applications. 4 months, then home confinement, then supervised release. And the company, Anderson Comfort Heating and Air, 30 years of his name on furnaces and banners, was liquidated to pay First Meridian. The banner came down from the softball field before the next season started. Madison's charge came from a different direction entirely. Once the forensic accountants, my colleagues, though not me, never me, the wall held, followed the loan money, they found it draining through Maison M's 3 corpses in ways that added up to wire fraud. 10 months in a minimum security federal camp, and the store's 4th incarnation closed before its 1st anniversary. Its curated retail experience sold off at auction in lots. Gary Pruitt surrendered his notary commission and settled with the bank quietly, the way men like Gary do everything. And the quitclaim, the one that stole my someday, was voided as the product of forgery. Grandma Ruth's cottage on Miller Pond came back to what her paper had always said. For the girls. My parents kept the house on Route 9, barely, mortgaged down to a smaller life, the exact size of the truth, as it turned out. People ask if I felt triumphant reading those dispositions. I felt the way you feel balancing a brutal ledger at 2 a.m, not joy, just, finally, arithmetic that held. It's been a year since the sentencing, and here is where everything actually lives now. Marion Falls still tells its own version of the story. Carol reports it to me over the phone like weather from a country I used to live in. In that version, depending on the pew, I am either the girl who did what somebody finally had to do, or the cold one who put her own mother on probation over some paperwork. I used to draft corrections in my head. I don't anymore. A town that needs its story will keep its story, and my name is no longer collateral for anyone's.